trimmed the list down. So you are the creme de la creme. It was the hardest thing to decide. You do understand there are many differentials in trying to sort of figure out the best composition for a workshop like this. It cannot just be strictly formalism, although we agreed, in fact, in the end, to just go for that. And we let everything else fall where they may, and so it turned out that some of the pieces fell outside the national capital region, which is wonderful. We didn't cover the spectrum of LGBTQ enough. But there was no way to tell that because we were doing a blind evaluation. There were no names attached to your manuscripts, and we couldn't even say if the manuscripts were written by a female or a male or anyone. So this is actually the way workshops are supposed to be done, except in the end, we will actually have the value added of the LGBTQ dimension, which we will all elaborate on and try to figure out as the workshop proceeds. So it's not a programmatic workshop in any sense at all. What qualified you here is your literary prowess, merit primarily, and secondarily your courage. Or maybe that's the primary one. To situate yourself under the signifier, under the banner of LGBTQ, which is its own statement, as we understand. I am the Philippine coordinator for Project Global Grace, which is a global or international arts and research consortium sponsored by the Research Councils United Kingdom and affiliated primarily with the University of London Goldsmiths. And with me here is Professor Mark Johnson from Goldsmiths. He and his wife Suzanne are actually the schemers, the conspirators behind Project Global Grace. It's a wonderful, wonderful project because it seeks to affirm cultures of equality all around the global south, meaning underdeveloped, developing countries, where equality, of course, is such a big concern. And they are not seeking to make cultures of equality happen. They are simply affirming the cultures that are already there. And we already have an LGBTQ writing community, whether we like it or not, thanks largely, I would suppose, to Ladlad and the efforts of the lesbian collective in the beginning, putting out their anthologies. There is that community already aborning throughout the country. And the Philippine project is creative writing. We are the national workshop, but the subsidiary workshop, we shouldn't call it that, but another workshop is a local workshop, which will be cited in the YMCA of San Pablo, and will involve local participants who are also mostly activists doing LGBTQ work in Laguna, in the environs of Laguna, and they will be focusing not so much on fixed genres, but on spoken word scripts. There will be a performative aspect to their workshops, in other words. Enunciative, performative, theatrical. We should console ourselves if we're not going to have to do that. We just have to write. And if we don't really read or perform our poems well in public, then we can let someone like Juan Miguel Sobero to do that for us. All these wonderful spoken word artists, you know, whose own works are actually quite wonderful. So with that, I'm turning now the floor over to Professor Johnson, who will contextualize our workshop within the broader framework of Project Global Grace. Mark Johnson.
Thanks, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. And my name is Mark. Just please call me Mark, not Professor Johnson. But thank you, Neil, for the introduction. And it's such an honor to be here with you, not least because having read your poems, they're amazing, fantastic, and looking forward to hearing the discussion. I have to say that I'm not an expert in poetry. My background is in anthropology, so I'm here to learn from the workshops together with you and be inspired as well. But I'll just say something briefly about the broader Global Grace Project. As Neil said, it's funded by the Research Councils UK through what they call the Global Challenges Research Fund. And underpinning global grace are just a few key ideas. And the first, as Neil has already alluded to, is this idea that equality is a cultural artifact. And what do we mean by that? Well, simply it means that as a cultural artifact, it is not something that is simply out there. It has to be made. And the emphasis on the kind of on cultures of equality also draws our attention to the kind of the role of the imagination, right? And poetry, not less than anything else, is an important part of that. We also wanted to, thinking about cultures of equality, really take to task and think about what equalities mean. In setting out to think about equalities, it's not presupposing that we already have a final destination there. That's for us to come up with. And finally, as Neil said, in thinking about the project, this was not about a group of people in Britain thinking, oh, we need to help the rest of the world find equality. Far from it. Rather, it was about thinking about the way in which people the world over are producing equalities in a variety of different ways and through a variety of different articulations and different imaginings of what this might mean for them. So we have projects based in South Africa, which is working with theater and working with sex workers who are going to be starting their own theater production group. In Brazil, we're working with folk who are working there on looking at alternative forms of masculinity through street art and performance and things like this. In Mexico, we're working with a group of people involved in what's called the Museum of Migration. And they're working with indigenous migrants from Central America, both into Mexico, but also from Mexico into El Norte. But they're using photography, visual arts, and things like this to talk about the possibility of migrating well and living well in different ways and what that might mean for them. Our other partner is in Bangladesh. And this project is to do with women who are working as construction workers in that country, which itself can be seen as a kind of interesting way of already challenging dominant ways of thinking about the divisions of labor and stuff like this. And the final bit of the project is partly led by the UK team, which is developing a global museum of equalities. And your work, we hope, will also contribute to what that museum might become. When I say museum, please see it as in scare quotes, because we're not thinking about a museum as this kind of this edifice, right? But rather as this kind of creative space of possibility. Yes, an event, exactly. And we're hoping that your productions might also contribute to that. But anyways, thank you very much. It's such an honor to be with you.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. I don't know if you're aware, but Mark has a very strong experiential claim to the LGBTQ topic, broadly speaking. His first book is an anthropological study of the Bantut, which is, of course, the Tausug equivalent for the Bayot and the Bakla. And it's quite an amazing book, and it opened the doors to so much other research in transgender studies in the whole world. So he's always quoted, he's cited, he's much cited transgender scholar, whether he likes it or not.
I like it.
This is, in other words, a kind of homecoming for him, because he has, after that book, he actually migrated to migration in other fields. You know, he's also just recently he brought to the Vargas Museum this wonderful curated exhibit on OFW art, particularly domestic helpers, right?
Yes.
Called Beyond Myself. And there's a queer element in it. I don't know if it had something to do with that too. Because many OFWs, particularly living in Hong Kong, the women, have husbands here and families, and then they become lesbians there, right? And then some of them leave their families behind and they become full-fledged, happy lesbians, okay? Which is a nice, interesting story in itself. So the workshop, as I said, is the first. This one is on poetry, and the director for this workshop is my colleague in the Institute of Creative Writing, which has very kindly affiliated our workshop. Okay, Actually, there are four of us who are from that institute who are in this workshop now. Of course, you know Francis Kina. He is the deputy of the ICW, UP-ICW. And fellows of the ICW are Professors Eugene Vasco, myself, and our director, Joey Bakiran, who is, of course, probably the best Filipino poet of love poetry of a gay sort. She's now working on a sonnet sequence, all love poems, all gay, like Shakespeare, you know. 155 also, or something. I don't know.
100 at least.
At least 100. Isn't that amazing? Our gay Pablo Neruda. Okay. I will now turn the floor over to him. This is all about introductions. It's not. We don't workshop anything yet. And because we are cramming things into the days that we have, sadly, later on we have an open consultation time, which means that we will preempt some of the work. So those who want to approach any of us may do so. We may, in other words, we will in fact preempt the discussion somewhat. Because if you want to consult privately, then we will already talk about your work. Which means that, you know, this kind of comes before the actual workshop. That's all right, I suppose. Just keep it between the two of you, and don't make it public, okay? Because we will all benefit from the public discussion. Now, Joey will take over to introduce everyone.
Yes. Actually, parang klase, no? We will be together for the next 5 days, and it's like a class. Kailang getting to know you, no? So, pero one shot na yung introduction of the self and your expectation of the workshop.
Yes.
So you have about 3.
This is very important. We would like to hear what you wish to get out of this workshop, and we will recalibrate accordingly. So try to meet them.
If you have 5 minutes each, because we have 1.5 hours, long time. So we'll be generous in giving you the airtime. So maybe the fellows first, and then the finalists later. So I think we should start with Maki, and then go.
You go down that way.
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Maki Torrichoria. I'm from Antique, so I speak Inaraga. It's my language. And I think my expectation for this workshop is really to expose Kinaraga literature to this group. I think that, I hope by the end of this workshop you would appreciate more our literature, our local literature in Antique or in Inaraga. So, I think that's it.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, okay.
Are you a graduate already, Maki?
Not yet, sir. I'm still working on my thesis. I'm a literature major in the University of the Philippines, Visayas. I'm 21 years old.
The BFL campus or the City?
BFL campus.
The BFL one.
And I'm currently working as a writer at the provincial capital of Antique, and I'm a pageantera.
Have you won pageants already?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Congratulations.
Yukon.
The old word is contesera.
Yes, sir. Nag-workshop na ako sa IAS last time with Sir John. That's why we know each other already. And Sir John is from Antique also. And I'm just so happy that I get to represent Pinalaya literature here in this workshop.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stena Padilla. I'm a graduate of the best university in the world, the universe rather, UP Diliman. Journalism. This is my first workshop in poetry. And I work as an editor for News Philippines by day, by night. Never mind. Expectations. Well, I've said this before during the Media Latanya workshop last year that I expect my work to be in Filipino kakatayan. Although, of course, actually I encourage, whenever I let people read my work, I encourage them to give negative feedback only. Because that's the only way that I could improve my work. Otherwise, if it's positive, then I just say thank you, but I need the negative feedback. So that's what I'm going to, that's what I expect to hear from all of you guys. But also not just negative, but more importantly, constructive feedback, criticisms. And also I want to hear the background behind each point from all of you guys. So how you were able to construct the words, everything. What else? I guess that's it. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Paulo Sumayo. I am Bicolano, but I live between Puerto Princesa, Piñan, Naga, and Makati. Yeah, I work with Havaianas, so I get to travel most of the time. So I work in marketing. I graduated many years ago. I'm 31 years old. I finished literature at the Ateneo de Naga University. But then I took fashion merchandising afterwards in Manila. So that's when I got into most of the retail work that I'm working on now. I write in Bicol, Filipino, English, and Rinconada, which is the mother tongue of my mom. But let me just speak in Tagalog. Pag nag-aaway sila sa bahay, they speak in Rinconada. Rinconada is a language in South Bicol. It's a very Germanic, matigas na language. My very first workshop, I am starstruck. I think I'm having a Venus Ra moment. I mean, just looking at the
Major
names,
moment.
major. I mean, Sir Ronald Baitan, it's Sir J. Neal, and of course Sir Bakira. And I've only been reading you through that live for years, and then now I'm here.
Yes, we're ancient.
Hindi naman. So I'm expecting.
By the way,
yes,
I
sorry.
saw it in your kit. Vim Yapan, who is a writer in Bicol, will be
Yes.
coming just for the 2 Bicol manuscripts.
Okay.
Because we will need, even if there are translations, we will
Right.
need a first language
local context.
input. Yes.
Yes.
It's quite an accomplished Bicol writer as well.
Another starstruck moment.
Yes, we see them. Yes.
So yun, I'm expecting, since I'm so sort of presenting Bicol, the Bicol Bading kind of sensitivity or sensibility rather, I wanted to sort of put that at the fore to talk about regional voices in queer writing. Although Ladlad has provided us so much of the groundwork in terms of the Bading, the Bakla voice, I think there's more to the regional voice.
It's very NCR.
Yes, yes. So most of my work is, since Bicol kasi is very heavy on Ina, the faith for Peña Francia, the maternal Bading, mama's boy kind of perspective. Also, we love pageants.
I know, yeah, we gave it for Peña
Miss
Francia.
Gay, we've had it for
Which is
50
the second
years.
oldest one.
49.
Yes, the oldest one is Mandaue pala.
Yes,
So
yes.
Cebu has the claim. Cebu wins
Yes,
for the
yes.
oldest trans pageant. The
Yes.
second one is Peña Francia.
Yes, Miss Gay Bicolandia. And we have so much wealth in terms of archetypes we have the Babayla, the Asogs as well, Orion as a temptress, and of course the macho,
Daragang
Daragang
Magayon
Magayon.
can be queered easily.
Exactly. So I'm hoping that I kind of be a vessel to surface those things in terms of discussions.
Thank you so much.
So I'm Thomas Shaw. I'm 19. I'm an incoming 4th year student here at UP Diliman. I do comparative lit. I'm half colonizer, half Filipino.
American?
British.
So not quite. Not for the
Colonized other countries.
indirect.
Indirectly. I come from Siargao, so I come from a small island that didn't used to be recognized that much. It got popularized with tourism, and now it's getting destroyed by all these tourists coming in. Everything's a mess because of that movie. Expectations about the workshop. Well, I love poetry. It's one of the things I need to study. But preferably, I'd actually also love to see how the study of poetry extends to, as mentioned earlier, to the regions, the idea of places where generally there hasn't really been an exploration of the queer voice, or it has always been perceived one-dimensionally by the locals. I also love to see how it extends to ideas of tropicality, ideas of the island, extension, and the ecosystem and things around it, as someone who also likes to do a bit of eco-criticism. And also generally to see how poetry for all of the fellows extends to their own social consciousness, how they belong to their own social spaces and how poetry relates to them.
Is your shifting from CW to comparative literature affected by this theoretical bent that you have, just judging by your language now?
Yes.
So you are interested in the theory of poetry rather than just the practice of it?
Mostly I shifted because of Dr. Bison.
Ah. Oh, she's to blame.
I loved her class.
Yes.
And I also fell in love with the curriculum. And also because I grew up in a colonial household, I never really learned how to do the Filipino language properly. I only learned it here this past till 40, thank God. So it was also a way to sort of branch out into the language issues, even if we didn't directly have electives in the Filipino language. So it also helped me learn the language more by delving straight into the theory of it.
Yes, that's lovely. Okay.
Thomas too.
Kagaya ni Orpheus, ako ay lumilikha ng mga
How do we
tula.
call you first? You have so many names.
You can call me Michael.
Michael, yes.
Lumilikha ako ng mga tula tungkol sa kasawian ng mundo. Ako si Michael Thomas Normita. Yun lang. Wala akong inaasahan kasi ayoko masaktan.
A little more.
Tagapamantasang normal ng Pilipinas ako.
Philippine normal.
Yes.
So,
Teachers.
nag-aaral pa or tapos na?
Nag-aaral pa po.
Gusto mo maging guro?
Abogado po talaga gusto ko.
May workshop experience ka na before this one?
Panihang Rogelio Sibat.
Alright.
Kasama ko sa third year.
So hindi naman siguro puro kasawian lang. Although kung si Orpheus ang iyong parang prototype guest, mahirap yun. Kasi sa reach siya to the very end. Diba?
At saka, hinihintay ko kasi yung pagbabalik ng musa.
Nawala ang musa mo.
Ewan ko kung nasa na siya.
Okay. Baka dito mo sa workshop pakita. Thank you, Michael.
Maraming salamat sa pagkakas.
And then from Marvin.
Marvin.
This is actually my first in UP. The last time was first sa ating Paniti in Binidulumbea.
Yes.
I was there. And again, the first time, I don't know, this is what we call Rambang or Sawisaw. That's our term for, and for, how do you call this? Lucky or luck, some sort of that thing. I'm applying for DepEd. I'm a licensed professional teacher, English major, and this is actually not my first time to attend a workshop. Because in the region we also have our regional workshops with the Saringsing. We also have in our own school in SUA. We have Jerome Hipolito, Cristian Cordero, and the other writers in Bicol. That's the time that I started writing. Prior to that, I was already doing my craft, but I'm not really confident that my writings would be read by people. But during the time that I was shortlisted in the final list of the Premio Arejola, that's the time that I ding, something like that into my mind. Like, there's something with the way, and this is the time na sumali ako sa mga workshops. And, yun.
Do we call you Marvin or do you have another name?
Marvin.
Marvin. Your expectations? Because you've had so much workshop experience, apparently. What would, in this particular workshop, what do you expect?
I actually do fiction, but of course, we try to turn to different genres. And poetry is like one of my weakest point, so I'm trying to look for other experts like you to help us enhance or shape our craft. Thank you.
Thank you, Armin.
Okay.
Hi.
Sino naman? Hi, si King.
Hi. I am King. I'm 22 years old from Lucena City, Quezon Province. This is the
Did
very...
you come by bus from Lucena now?
no, I live in Manila right now.
You live in Manila.
This is the very first writers' workshop I've ever been a part of, so I'm honored. And more so, the very first national writers' workshop for LGBTQ writers. I currently live a bit like a hermit right now. More so because I don't have a job. But thanks to a scholarship award late last year, I am currently taking my master's degree in environmental science at La Salle University. I guess I started to take my writing seriously January last year. That was 4 months after a relationship ended with the guy. Yeah, it was, yeah. The person was very toxic and had a lot of emotional baggage with me.
It's in your suite. We can see it.
Well, so sometime around January 2017, I finished reading a poetry collection, and I thought to myself, I think I should translate this heartbreak into words. And so I did that. Although I don't have technical knowledge in the craft of poetry, I try to be as self-aware as possible in every line I write, so it connects to the entire poem itself. And I produced 5 out of that heartbreak, and last year I submitted that to Ateneo National Writers Workshop. It didn't get accepted, but the workshop director surprisingly messaged me and told me out of 60, 70 plus submissions, it placed 4th. So my heart was... it was a big deal. I mean, he also suggested I send it to a literary journal somewhere, and I found one, and all 5 of them got published. And I guess that's where it all started for me. And I'm here and expecting, since Lucena City isn't quite a potent place for writers or artists, I didn't really have anyone to guide me. And there isn't really a space for writers there. So I guess I'll hope to find here the voice I have in my craft.
Thank you.
Thank
Hello, Alfonso Manalastas. You may call me Alfie. I'm 25 years old. I'm from Butuan City. I've been based here for 3 years now. I am a spoken word artist. This is sort of my first time trying my hand on written poetry because of like the cadence and the difference and all that. This is something I'm not used to. It's my first workshop, also the first one I applied for. And
Is there any reason why this is the first workshop? First one you applied for?
it's so weird
Did
because
the theme
thematically-
attract you? The theme of it?
Okay, a little background information. I'm not out to my family. But then, like,
Your family in Butuan?
they're in Butuan. I'm only out to one sister who's in London. Cannot accidentally spill it over dinner. so
But you've been living in Manila a while?
for 3 years.
You're out in Manila, I suppose.
Pretty out in Manila.
That's just normal story
Yeah.
of closeted Mindanaoans
Yeah.
kind of going crazy in Manila. There will be, by the way, after our introductions, Mark will speak again about a very strict, this is funded by the RCUK, and they have very strict ethical standards in any kind of research or arts project, that they fund. So you will have to signify your consent to many things, including the capturing of your face, your image, your own personal image that might actually be part of the documentation of the workshop. The video's been running a while now. You can just attack yourself, Alfie, or we don't even attack. That's all that everyone's doing anyway. Okay, so I'm sorry, but that will be part of the discussion in a little bit. Okay.
Gotcha. So yeah, I'm not out of my family. Also thematically, I feel like I am unable to integrate my queer sensibilities into my writing. So that's something I'm expecting to.
Would you like to then?
Yes.
Is that something you'd like to do?
Yes. At the same time, because I've never had any like scholarly training of some sort in poetry, definitely I want to work on the aesthetic of my writing. So it's both the queer aspect and the fact that it's a writer's workshop that attracted me to this one.
Thank you, Alfie.
Thank you.
So, maayong hapon or good afternoon to everyone. I'm Mariette Alonzo. I'm from Davao City. Currently, I am finishing up my thesis for psychology in the Ateneo de Davao University. I'm also an activist, so I was one of the co-founders of our LGBT organization in Ateneo de Davao after a lot of negotiations.
With the Jesuits.
With the Jesuit, yes. With the scientific.
You will have to tell us the inside story of how you managed to do it, so we can spill the beans to the other LGBTQs in other religious schools, right?
Yeah, I think Xavier will also be following.
Xavier is in Cagayan.
Yes. So, amazing.
Will UST ever see the light? We will not discuss it now. Ateneo de Manila has been queer from the very beginning. Yes, as Nico will tell us.
So this is actually my third writers workshop. So I've been to IAS and Ateneo. I still apply for the same genre, so poetry and English pa rin, because I wanted to see the different perspectives. So with regards po sa expectations, I guess with my experience in the past workshops, what differentiates for me a good criticism from a well, parang extra one, I guess I hope that everyone will read and read well the works. It's one of the things that I guess I found problematic at times, wherein sometimes some panelists or some critics would just look at the work or read the first line and don't like it, so yun siya. So what happens is that in the workshop, no one speaks at all sometimes, so
that won't happen here. You're gonna have to sort of stop people from talking.
So yun siya. So I hope that there would be a very active and engaged discussion based on all of our personal preparations.
So you were traumatized by those other workshops? Is that the bottom line?
There were certain incidents na nakakagulat.
Parang narinig ko nga one such.
Ay, oh my God. Chika ba? You will see it kasi may may transfer. Or anyways. Ayaw na magparinig. Pero yun siya. So yun siya po. So I hope that everyone will read, fellows and panelists alike, and that we would all be able to give each other their due the same way that we expect that people will read us as well.
Thank you, Maria. So to be read well, closely. Nico.
Hi, I'm Nico. I graduated from UP in 2013 with a broadcast communication degree.
But you were Atenean before then.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have to say that he is a product of Ateneo. High school, elementary and high school. Elementary, not so bad.
Yeah, high school was parachute even more.
Which is even, it's even worse. Sorry.
So you can see the writing is like that. Anyway, but right now I'm taking my master's degree in creative writing under ICW, and it's really exciting, guys.
I just said yes to advising him.
So I'm working on my thesis, and then yeah, it's my first workshop, so I don't really know how it's going to be different from the classes. But hopefully it's different also. My expectations are just to continuously hone what I've already been learning in the degree program. And
Are you almost done with the coursework or are you finished? It's just thesis.
actually, the languages happen.
Okay, almost done. What are your plans after you get your MA?
And being like part of as an NCR cis male writer and being a sheltered person, I hope that this workshop also opens me to different perspectives of tackling writing and poetry. And I think it's also a trap if you've been writing for a while to fall into the obstacles. So I also want to see if there's ways of innovation maybe, or new avenues that people can head towards.
Okay, thank you, fellows. This time it's the panelist turn. Introduction and expectation. We begin with Ronald.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be here, especially the company of Lucasia, who's been my friend for the longest time. Sorry. Janet Migueloro. Okay, with my sister for how many?
Decades.
For decades. So today we were asked by Lucasia to talk about our expectations. In short, that for me translates into what am I looking for when I am in a workshop. Okay, so basically I'm looking for two things. And what are these? Let me just check. Right, two simple things. Technical brilliance and politics. Okay, and a very good marriage of these two. Because sometimes writers produce technically polished work, but they're homophobic. So what do you do with that kind of work? How do you salvage it? I mean, not in the Filipino sense, but to salvage it, to save it. Okay? So that's one of. So for me, these two will go hand in hand in an LGBTQ workshop. For technical brilliance, I'm looking for linguistic dexterity, language. Basically, what is poetry? It's all about language. Verbal gymnastics, linguistic Olympics, whatever that may be, right? So I'm looking for that, a flair for language, a passion for words. Number two, I want someone with a wild imagination. Not sex-driven, per se. Wild in the sense that, that person can produce stark images. That person can introduce me or reintroduce me to the world of the senses, right? This person has an acute understanding of the world's rhythms. And then, number three, I am looking for a fine ear for the mellifluous, for the euphonic, meaning sound, music. It's very, very important to the writing of poetry. And last, a formal daring. Poetry is a visual form. You see things on the page. So I want the writer to be careful with how he or she uses words on the page, and to be able to, also experiment. There's not really one way of writing. There are so many tendencies or impulses or trajectories that your writing can take. And I wish that, writers, especially young writers, will actually be more daring in that regard. Okay? If you're too used to open forms, then why not explore closed forms? Right? Auden, for instance, was more modernist when he was younger. Because later on, he actually produced more closed form poems. Okay? And of course, he succeeded. He was so good at it. Number two is, politics. So I would call it simply as vision. So as a writer, what changes would you like to see in your world? Parang buwan lang, di ba? But with a technical, with the responsibility for aesthetics, for the art, poetry. So what is the role of the imagination in our revisioning of the world? Of course, revision comes from Aidan Rich. Okay, she likes to use the early Aidan Rich would use that. Okay, where are you coming from? And how does that place or positionality that you wish to foreground in your work intersect with other subject positions and concepts? For instance, race, ethnicity, class, gender, linguistic affiliation, region, all these things. What is the trajectory as well as texture of your dialogue with the regional, national, and global imaginary? Just another question that I'm going to look for in your poetry. What is your liberatory praxis all about? In short, how do you want to transform this world into, a more humane, less homophobic, less heterosexist, less sexist world? Okay, so Whitman once wrote, in Omeo Life, and I quote, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. So my last question is, what is your contribution to the evolving discourses on LGBTQ identities and politics as a poet, as an artist? So these two things, again, politics and technical abilities or polish. Thank you.
John?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Like Ronald, I'm happy that we are now working with Daniel Garcia. So my idol. And his book like that, anthologies, changed my life. For more than a decade now, I've been sitting as panelist in national workshops like Iligan Workshop, IAS Workshop, and Cornel Fego Workshop. And every time I would do a gay reading, I think it made some older panelists, most of them were heterosexuals or closeted. And then so I feel that sometimes they treat this as a joke, every time I do a gay reading. So this afternoon, I still can't believe that I'm in this workshop because now I think I'm the norm here. No, I'm not the aberration here. No, I'm the norm. No? So I prepared something, and please permit me to read. No? This is just short. No? I entitled my short essay, Mensahe ng Serena sa mga batang baklang manununod. Bakla na. Sumali na lang sila. Yun lang kasi yung alam ko. So, mensahe ng Serena sa mga batang baklang manunulat. Maging matapang tayo. Huwag tayong babakla-bakla, kahit bakla naman talaga tayo. Ising and dance natin ang ating mga saya, lungkot, ligaya, takot, pag-ibig at galit sa ating mga kwento at tula. Wala tayong karapatang maging baklang manunulat kung hindi tayo matapang. Maging matalino rin tayo. Huwag tatanga-tanga. Bakla lang tayo, hindi tayo boba. Huwag maniwala sa mga chenes na hindi pang contest ang mga akda ng kabaklaan. Dahil hindi beauty contest ang buhay, lalo na ang buhay ng pagiging baklang manunulat. Kapag tanggap natin na tayo ay baklang manunulat, automatic ang ating pagiging beauty queen. May mga kaibigan tayo, mga kasabayan nating manunulat na bakla din, ang magsasabing sawa na sila sa tsupaan, sa tamod, sa uringan, sa mga kwento at tula, kung kaya sasabihin nila tayong magsulat na tungkol sa state of the nation, poverty porn, graft and corruption, human rights violation, at build the nation. Gaga, huwag tayong maniwala sa kanila. Wala namang mali tungkol sa pagsulat tungkol sa kalagayan ng mga mahirap at abti nating kababayan, korupsyon at nation building, at dapat lang naisipin din natin ito bilang mga baklang manunulat at simulat din tayo tungkol dito. Subalit hindi porket tungkol sa tsupaan at uringan at pagpiswit ng tamod at sinusulat natin, ay wala na itong kinalaman sa mga netsupwera sa lipunan at sa mga tanungang paraan pag-uon ito nga kaloka nating bansa. Sabi nga ng mga lola natin, ang personal ay political din, lalo na kung bakla tayo. Ngunit huwag hamuyan itong mga pretensyosa nating kaibigang bakla. Kaawaan natin sila sapagkat kapag sinasabi lang sawa na sila sa tsupaan at uringan, hindi pa talaga nila natikman ang masarap na tsupaan at uringan dahil masyadong tense palagi ang kanilang sphincter at wala nang panlasa ang kanilang dila at wala nang pandama ang kanilang lalamunan dahil sa sobra-sobra nilang pagpapanggap. May mga matandang manunulat na magsasabing wala naman talagang LGBTQ literature, kundi literature lang. Huwag tayong padadala kahit na minamahal at sinasamba natin sila. Kinakasangkapan sila ng lipunan upang itlin ang hininga ng ating pagdalita at burahin ang mga kwento ng ating buhay. Sumulat at ipamukha sa kanila na may baklang literatura dahil may mga baklang manunulat tulad natin na hindi lamang magaganda, kundi matatapang at matatalino rin. Nauuso sa panahon natin ngayon ang pataasan ng ihip pagdating sa estilo ng pagsusulat na parang bang may isang paraan lamang ang paglikha ng mga kwento at tula. Yak! Huwag tayong sumali dyan kahit ng iba sa atin ay trip ang golden shower. Ang moral aesthetics ay hindi preoccupation ng isang matinong baklang manunulat. Gawain lamang yan ng mga privileged class, kasama dyan ang totoong elite at mga social climber lamang. O mga baklang manunulat na ayaw o hindi makaladlad kaya nagtatago sa ivory tower na kanilang pseudo-intellectualism. Muli, huwag natin silang kamuhian. Sa halip, kaawaan natin sila. Kung ang iba sa kanila ay cute naman at sa ating paningin at panlasa, pwede natin offlangin na makapag-orgasm naman sila at makasakaling matauhan. Maging generous at gracious tayo sa isang pagkaklaan. Hanggat maaari, maging mabait tayo sa isa't isa. Noong bata pa ako sa Antique, takot ako masigawan ng mga bully na agi-agi may putay sa dahi o bakla-bakla may puki sa noo. Ngayon, hindi na ako takot. May puki naman kasi talaga ako sa noo. Pero ang puking ito ay matarin na mas maraming nakikita kung kaya mas malalim at mas malawak ang aking pangunawa. Lahat tayo ay may puki sa noo. Tanggapin natin ito kahit na mahirap dahil kung minsan nagiging dahilan ito upang apihin tayo. Pero huwag matakot. Huwag babakla-bakla kahit bakla naman talaga tayo. Ipagtanggol natin ang puki natin sa noo. Ipagmayabang natin ito. Sapagkat itong puki natin sa noo ay hindi lamang basta puki kundi matalim. At para sa ating mga manunulat, pangalawa natin itong bibig upang mas maging magiliw ang ating pag-awit. Ang puking ito sa ating noo ang panlaban natin sa hangal at upang ating mundo. I love you all. I thank you.
Hirap sundan. Magandang hapon. No? Maraming salamat kay Dr. Garcia sa pag-imbita sa akin. Hindi ko alam kung ba't ako narito dahil mas kilala ako bilang manunulat para sa bata. Pero...
Makata ka rin. Maganda yung may mga premyo na yung mga tula mo.
At maraming salamat sa inyo dahil natanggap ako sa ladlad, yung mga true volume ng ladlad, yung pang-apat na best ng ladlad. Maraming salamat po. Background lang, ang ladlad ang nagsalba sa akin sa buhay yung kolehiyo. No, ang hirap magkaroon ng boses, no, bata pa ako. No, hirap maging pakla no, sa universidad. Kaya galing ko ng high school noon. Biktima ng bullying, no, pero pagdating sa universidad, may isang libro, maging dalawa, no, na tumulong sa akin, no, na hanapin yung aking boses. At yun ang ladlad. No, so, yun ang hahanapin ko no, sa mga tula sa workshop nito. No? Kung paano ba tayo tutulong no, sa mga kapwa natin. Tama sinabi mo no, na maging matapang, na huwag papaapi. Yun din ang hinahanap ko. No, yun din ang hinahamon ko sa mga makatanga yun. No? Paano tayo tutulong sa mga walang boses na bakla, mga lesbian, yung mga roseta. No? Yung pagtulong na yan ay hindi lamang sa pagpapahayag ng sarili, no? Kung hindi, yung aking advokasya ngayon, no? Tumulong din para sa mga bakla na naging biktima ng epidemya ng HIV. Yun nga, no? Manulat ako pang bata at malapit na lumabas yung aming kauna-unahang young adult gay and lesbian anthology na ipapublish ng Page Jump sa 2019. Tapos, ngayong sa susunod na buwan na lalabas ang aking kauna-unahang picture book ng gay and lesbian na kwento pang bata.
Anong title ng libro?
Dalawa no? Dalawa. Ang tatay ni Clara, ang nanay ni Emma. So, baliktaran kwento ko. No? Yung nanay na lesbian at yung tatay na gay. So, tapos yung illustrator ko ay si Tokma Peña-Puli na illustrate ng bonggang-bonggang bata Teddy. So, ano ang hinahanap ko? Nasabi ko na yung una, no? Natutulog, no? Magapay sa mga kapwa. Sa kapwa. Pero dalawa yung aking no? Dalawang keyword ang aking hinahanap. Una ay yung parang urian to no? Yung
pagsusulat, ayoko yung i-impose ko, no? I-dicta ko, no? Sa isang manulat na gayahin ninyo paano ako sumulat o gayahin nyo itong mga manulat na ito na inaakala ko mahuhusay naman. No? Pero, no, gusto kong makita sa mga manuskrito na ito ay pinaghirapan. No? Na meron itong tangka, no, na maghintulat. Paano ito? May tangka, no, sa paggamit ng wika, no, paano ba hinahati ang mga linya, paano ba yung mapusay na gamit ng mga imahen, no, ng mga larawan. No? Pangalawa, no, ito ay medyo mabigat na hinahanap ko. No? Ako ay nagsaliksik din, no, ng mga kwentong pornografiya at mga tula. Inaral ko lahat yan, yung mga tula ng bakla na na-publish ng UP Press. No? Anthology namin ito nila Rosel Pineda ng Tabi-Tabi sa Pagsasantabi. No? Hinahanap ko, o namin, ang mga tulang bakla at lesbiana na positibo ang tinatataan. No? Hindi lang ito yung naglabas ka lang, no, ng karanasan mo, sabi nga dyan, yung kita ni Chupa, hindi lang yun. No? Paano natin gagawing mas positibo ang imahin natin, no, bilang bakla. No? Pangalawa, medyo matagal yung ladlad, no? 2 dekada na yata, 2 dekada na. Paano natin i-update ito kung maglalabas tayo ng mga panibagong? So naghahanap ako, ano ba ang bago? Yun ang hanapin ko. Paano may papakita sa amin ang bagong kultura ng bakla at lesbian? Transgender. Ano ang bago? Pangalawa, kailangan updating. No? Tapos, ang challenge ko rin, no, sa mga makata ngayon, may tutan niyo akong tawagin mga batang mga makata. Kasi medyo matanda na ako. Paano yung pagsasamahin ang personal at ang kamalayang panlipunan? Oo, no? Pero mga manunulat na nagsasabi na, ay, mga fighting ang pagkano, titi na lang ako. May nagsasabi na gano'n, titi na lang iniisip ninyo. No? Sagutin natin yan, no? ng paglalagay sa ating panulat ng kamalayang panlipunan. No? Paano makakatulong yung mga akda natin para imulat ang marami, no? Halimbawa sa safe sex, HIV awareness, alisin yung stigma, no, ng mga natamaan ng virus. Yan ang hahanapin ko, no, sa inyong mga panulat. At yun din ang hinahanap ko, no, sa aking mga susulatin sa mga susunod na panahon. Maraming salamat.
Good afternoon, everyone. To sit here in front of you today in the capacity I have been trusted with as your panelist, I had only thought to be possible in the distant future. That is not true. I never even thought we would ever all be here. From the conception of this workshop and every meeting after, I had to pinch myself to remind myself that this is happening. And can I just say, wow. I'm still very affected by that. It's just wonderful to be among everyone here. Just sitting here, this kind of presence in itself is some kind of affirmation. And I still have no words for this kind of gratitude and affirmation today. In my own practice, I have, without any words, just stood quietly in the presence of larger powers, as myself, and among many, without much fanfare. To get up every day, to remain standing, is in itself an act of resistance in a current that surely seeks to overwhelm me with its presence. But where is the better place to stand? Among the free, or among those in the deep currents of erasure? I think you know my choice is clear. Art is best created under incredible pressures on the self, which main attention is to erase and cause one to disappear. The fracturing, the fragmentation, the dissipation of action, speech, acts, and gestures, the momentary limbs, the temporary, that is where I am as a poet and performance artist. That is where most of us are. Although the term queer is considered by many a loose domain, it is within its spaces that I reside, and it is beyond the established structures of gay and lesbian that I find where my art thrives. It is within its destabilizing qualities, its temporalities, I find much material. So here are my expectations. How does the poetic line cause tensions in a largely heteronormative history of poetry? How does it stand or dissipate on the page? How does it cause fractures when performed? How does performance fracture? How is the live moment versus the lived moment necessary in a world where permanence is valued? I find pleasure where things do not line up. I am a poet using her poet's body to create poetry in the space and duration of the lyric sequence. My choice of installation art and performance art as the modes of representation of my LG series in a lyric sequence provides my audience a sensory experience of the abstraction surrounding mourning and loss, its erotics, its politics, using physical states, space, and duration. I have done, so far, 12 hours of durational performance, parceled in 3 elegies. I have done 6 elegies in total. I have also done a number of shorter performances called infinite gestures, which serve as envoys, voltas, and create resonance throughout the elegiac sequence. What I am saying is this: poetry can be created using the body in space. It is not necessary for poetry to just be on the page. I was first struck by the possibility of poetry beyond the traditional poetic form on the page and their avant-garde counterparts when I first encountered Ashley David's video of an elegy, Fine Things, Flip Sides, and Transformation, which she called in the interview on the online journal The Offending Adam, a performance of theory and a visual elegy for her dead husband, David, interspersed with slides where she invited the audience to co-create the experience. This postmodern elegy was confined in the space of the conference format. She delivered it as a conference, okay? She delivered the elegy as a conference paper, and the mode of delivery and interactions were dictated by that space. So, I also have other examples of this kind of poetry, but you might be interested to view a project closer to performance poetry to warm up to the idea of poetry in space, as space. It is called Inventory, Under Objects, Under Oath. This is a 7-hour performance by writer-performer Chelsea Hodson. She cataloged, photographed, and wrote about every object in her apartment for 656 consecutive days. The list was read with 2 short breaks for 7 hours and 13 minutes. There were 657 objects documented and written about. After the performance was done, the blog, its photographs, everything written was erased. What remained was the documentation of the video. Okay. This kind of poetry cannot be commodified. What is left is usually just a trace and not the poem itself. Which is why I'm saying that there is the live moment and there is the lived moment, which we always encounter in poetry on the page, diba? So there is a live moment in poetry in space. So, the experience of the structure and gestures are key. My personal project, Grief is Made a Home, though it is not homely or home-like because the structure is cold and foreign, even surreal without real spaces to rest in. I posit a life of a poem beyond the page and beyond mere structures displayed in galleries. I insist that the body generates the poem in its durational movements and high focus in spaces, objects, and inhabited structures. I offer this to you, fellows and panelists, as a possible future for your poetry.
Thank you.
Okay, Joey, the next panelist is Shane Carion, who's currently in New York. And she sent us her intro video where she will talk about her poetics. She will also be participating, hopefully without any trouble, through Skype or FaceTime. For now, we'll listen to her intro. She will talk about, because I already watched it, she'll talk about what we've been doing, no? Expectations and such. Okay, let's listen. Sana the sound is fine.
My history in being taught and doing poetry is pretty much the usual in the Philippines, which I appreciate. I went through workshops, regional workshops, and national creative writing workshops, being told a number of things which most likely you'll hear from me too in this workshop. The workshops then, and I think to this day, generally from a formalist standpoint. And I remember one of the earliest work I submitted, I was writing a number of pieces, what I much later learned as Dadaist poetry, and I was told it's not good work, I should stop doing this. But at the time I was actually creating those pieces, I had the intuition that the entire page was my resource, and many things that happens in poetry is actually like beyond the page. There's a lot of possibility there, and the work, at least how I felt, was to make those things that spill beyond the page, to wrestle with them, so at least I have something that resonates within the limit of the bond paper, within the bond paper, and then to be told, no, these are your only options. Gotta be a boy or gotta be a girl, and to do this kind of particular kind of poem or writing poems. My approach to things, and even to this day, is always from wonder. So I did hear what the panelists said at the time and listen to it to a certain extent, try to work with it, work my way through it and around it. I think one of the best pieces of advice I got was to learn the rules well, learn it as best as you can, so you can break it, which is really the intent, to break it well. And I mean, this is not surprising, I think, considering our life as courageously breaking away every day from that mold to live our own truths. So what I'm trying to say is that while my aesthetics definitely, it's got limits, of course, I pretty much have a wide range of modes of poetic expression that I appreciate. Even Eminem, who has a lot of hate in him. I think one might call my aesthetics eclectic. I think of poems as fragments of poetry entire, and that poems are modes of expression, which includes public art or live art. It's not the time to explain a field paper, which I will find a way to have it published in an essays on poetics, but in a nutshell, when one decides to express using a particular material, the materiality of it, in this case, early printed words on white space, the limits of a shorthand paper, etc., one should be able to be decisive and be conscious why you decide to render it in this or that particular way. Sure, we have creative intuition, and that is something artists like us have. Sometimes we say our bodies just know it, we just have the sense, and we follow intuition, which is good. We don't just stop there though. If we intend to make our craft better, we have to be aware of what we're doing, exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, why in this way and not that, how we're doing it, what other ways this thing can be done or expressed or be participated or shared with others. Also, for whom are we doing the art? Of course, it's completely just, I'm sure it's just my belief, you may have other, but I always think not to navel gaze or live in an echo chamber all the time. I mean, once in a while, okay. In appreciating certain works of art, like the poems in this workshop, I take a phenomenological standpoint. Sounds fancy, but what I really just mean is I take the poem for what it is. I don't measure it against a fixed standard or frame, unless the poem aligns itself to a tradition, knowingly or unknowingly. So generally I don't say do this or do that, just show possibilities, ask questions that the author might have missed or might like to think about in the process of revising the work.
Thank you, Shane.
Siguro ako muna at balikan.
Ako na, ikaw last word. Ikaw, director. I have general remarks about the workshops themselves. Some of these remarks I actually read in the conference in London, and I think it's worthwhile reading them again here so you understand more or less the philosophy for this. First thing I'll say is that I'm just so happy to be given the opportunity to make this dream come true. Richie, it has always been my dream to have a workshop like this. Not that I believe that the workshops I went through myself had no value. They obviously had value. I became a writer, a better writer, more committed writer because of them. But I always felt that I became a better writer despite them. I mean, I don't want to sort of like say that I learned nothing. No, that's not true. It's just that there is always, it's sometimes well-meaning, but there's this homophobia. I'm sorry to say it so clearly, plainly. Recently, I was at the thesis defense of an MA student in Malikani Pagsulat, and one of the panelists, a very sort of big name in Philippine writing in Filipino, just dismissed it and said, "Puro titi lang naman to eh." And I thought to myself, ano ngayon kung puro titi? Basta magandang pagkakasulat, di ba? At saka hindi totoo puro titi lang, kasi ang titi naka-attach tao at ang tao ay may kasaysayan, may kultura, mayroong pinanggalingan. So very obviously there is that homophobia, and sometimes homophobia is very subtle. We have wonderful mentor friends in this university who anthologize poems and then include you in their anthologies, but always make sure that the poems they chose that you wrote are the non-gay ones, and you see it as a pattern, and you realize, you ask yourself, I've written so many gay poems, and I think I like some of them better than the ones you selected. Okay, but you can't argue, because that's a matter of taste, and of course the taste is homophobic. Now, there may be no better way, I think, to address the challenge being posed by Global Grace, which is all about celebrating and supporting gendered and sexual cultures of equality around the world. In other words, intuitions and practices of resistance and justice, especially in the Global South, than the championing of creative communities. So you understand from the description that Mark gave us, all the different projects in Bangladesh, Brazil, Mexico, and South Africa are all about intuitions of resistance and justice from the ground, being sort of now affirmed and curated and sort of globally showcased so that everyone in the world can learn. Writing is especially crucial to the question of equality in the Philippines because as an ideal, it is an ideal, right? Equality presupposes the incumbency and viability of a literate and comparative imagination, one that is able to moderate and confound the situational predisposition of the oral mind and abstract out of the specificities of lived experience to think in categorical terms. After only a century of public education, forget about the Spanish period, 333 years of illiteracy, probably rote memorization of novenas and missals and things like that, but largely illiteracy. The Philippines remains enduringly oral by and large. Many of our national problems may be traced to the unevenness of our population's literacy, which must exceed the merely functional and become archival or profound if it should leave the clannish and regional mentality of its archipelagic origin and truly cohere as a nation on one hand, and commit itself to the scriptural stability of democratic aspirations on the other. This is my pet theory, that we are still oral, despite a century of functional literacy. You understand this orality in the provisionality with which we handle categories. A red light can be green if we have pangtong. You can kick a dictator out and 10 years later welcome them back and vote them back in Congress. Those are very sort of like clear examples, but the examples are actually many of how provisional and negotiable memory is. That's orality. That's not scripturality. Scriptural memory is absolute. Like the law is the law. Like, categories, okay? Which has its own dangers. It can turn fascistic after a while, but we need a bit of that, okay? Now, the workshop has been a moving force in the development of literature in the Philippines, chiefly in the dominant languages of English and Filipino. So this is a wonderful opportunity to hear the many other beautiful languages of the country that have not been privileged as much as these two languages. So, as I told you, we did not exercise affirmative action in terms of regions or languages, but it turned out that the best writing comes from the regions after all, and you're here. How did the writing workshop start? It started in the 1950s, initiated by Iowa-trained professors at Silliman, and it was picked up and institutionalized in other major universities. It has served as a rite of passage for amateur writers from all across the country who are granted fellowships that entitle them to short-term residencies, during which their manuscripts receive critical feedback and critique from senior writers. This is one such occasion. We are senior writers, and we will give you feedback, okay? And you have this residency in this not very good hotel, not very bad either. It's much better now. It was in worse shape like 10 years ago. Now, as a pedagogical paradigm and drawing from the new critical perspective that occasioned it in the West, the Creative Writing Workshop claims to be ideology-free. You know that, right? It's supposed to be, no, we don't care about ideology in a Creative Writing Workshop. You could be any kind of ideology. What matters is that it is well written, right? That's all that matters. Focusing strictly, as its scrutiny supposedly does, on the formal and structural elements of the given text, and bracketing out of the literary analysis biographical and other extrinsic concerns like the author's as well as the reader's gender, class, sexual, religious, ethnic, regional positionalities. Actually, the tonal practice in the workshop is you don't speak if you're the author. We don't introduce you until the very end. No one should know who you are. But we're not going to do that here. Okay? And there's a reason for that. This immanentist approach has of course been rejected in literary theory and criticism, but strangely enough in the creative writing establishment it has stayed. And no one has questioned it, right? Even in our own classes. Okay? What we do here will be to seek to rectify this practice, which has most certainly not succeeded in suspending value judgments in the selection, appraisal, and mentorship of creative manuscripts, particularly where they are about and rooted in eccentric, both EX-centric and ECC-centric, dissident and extra-normative experiences. It's clear that even, especially in the predominantly Roman Catholic Philippines, heteronormativity informs many, if not all, of the liberal humanist assumptions that operate in so-called strictly formalist readings, animating such common sense ideas as desire, relationships, domesticity, happiness, and of course nature and even life itself. How often has it happened in the Philippine classroom that in the face of a love story whose characters are not legibly gendered, the default interpretive perspective adopted to make sense of it is heterosexual? Not only is this presumption discriminatory against confessional or autobiographical LGBTQ writers, it also subjects their text to a ruinous reading or misreading, and its supposedly inevitable formal consequences. For instance, questions pertaining to character motivation, plot, and verisimilitude. If that is your default perspective, then everything is skewed. You're going to ask questions about character motivation, if that's heteronormative, right? That's a problem, but your characters are not straight. Okay, so that gets to be an issue. While it's true that all art aspires to universality, it's truer that in art most crucially, whose statements are never propositional but are rather embodied and evocative, the path to the universal necessarily happens through the particular. Ultimately, it's this denial of gender and sexual particularity, rationalized by new criticisms falsely or prematurely humanist ideology and enshrined in the heart of the creative writing paradigm, that proves most injurious of all. So we affirm here not just the truth, the level of illumination or the truth that all art supposedly has, the universal. We affirm the particular from which that is supposed to originate. Right? And the particular, we can all achieve, we can all in the end be saying the same things about love actually, but we all have to recognize the legitimacy and affirm the value of the specific lives from which this insight comes. You understand? That is, I think, the problem. That the denial and the dismissal happens on the level of the real, of the experience. Because some people are just homophobic and can't handle it. In the end, love is love. I mean, it's a cliche, but it's true. Okay? Alright. So, what will I look for in this workshop? I compose something, alright, which sounds like aphorisms, so a series of statements. The journey of art is the journey from the real to the true. As Louise Glick, I don't know if you know her, she's a wonderful poet, presciently intuits, the limit of what is real is what can be experienced. The limit of what is true is what can be imagined. Writing, art, is about the business of what's possible, which can be anything as far as the imagination is concerned. Both reality and truth need to exist, need to be performed in the text. So I'm going to look for that, the real in this work. If the poem flies to the takes off and immediately locates itself in the figurative and the metaphorical without the real being clear, that's a problem for me. Okay? In between the origin or reality and the destination, truth, are decisions that the writer will need to make. My task in this workshop is to thoughtfully consider these decisions in light of both the experience being represented and the illumination of it that's being proposed. You may call this task an especially readerly one, which means I am here to be a reader, albeit one who also writes. I'm supposed to have read and written more than you. This is a supposition that may or may not be true. At the very least, you can say that I have read and written enough to be able to offer sympathetic feedback. This sympathy emerges out of a well-meaning hypothesis that I can speculate rationally, going by the evidence of your work, about what your ambition or project in this particular instance may have been. After the speculative, the next task involves simple observation. I describe the achievement of the text against the vision of what I believe it would have wanted to be. The closer the gap between the two, the gladder I feel. For both you, for succeeding in your ambition, and for myself, for having had the good fortune of bearing witness to it. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, sa akin naman ay short and obligatory. Malagkutan na lang ko kay Neil kasi nung konting background ng personal. yung bata kasi mababantingin sa bakla, di ba? Tutuksoy ka, Tapos parang nagkaroon ka ng self-hate. Parang gano'n, parang homophobic. So meron pa akong traces noong parang Tony Perez type na. Pero dahil kay Miguel Garcia na-drop ko lahat. So, oo na nga, kasi nagkataon kasi yung ladlad noon. I was in the throw of true love. Kasi
you were in love then, yes, I remember.
Yeah. Ano kasi, hindi ko alam definition ng bakla. And then sa klase ni Michael Tan, yung chancellor na yun, sabi niya, maraming nakikipag-encounter sa kapwa dahil sa pera, dahil tawag dito, nalibugan ka lang, ganyan, Pero sabi niya, ang totoong bakla, pag na-inlove ka, doon ako nagkaroon ng insight, I love, So yun, parang naging kredo ko, Kaso kaya na-inlove ako sa lalaki, ayaw, So, sabi ko gano'n.
Tinulaan mo na lang, iniwan ka sa Trellis tuloy.
So,
Nagbilaan sa ladlag yun, kinwento niya sa buo.
Pwede ka naman may love sa iba, so yun. Mahirap na masarap magiging bading, pero ngayon mas masarap na. Pag natanggap mo. So parang gano'n yung background ko dito sa pagiging bading. Pero kung, ayun, okay naman yun. Pero ngayon dahil sa nasa literature tayo, tatlo naman ang punto ko sa introduction. Ano ba hinahanap kredo sa pagsulat? Tatlo lang naman, pagmumulat or insight, and then pag-ibig, love sa kapwa, maigi, pero mas inclusive ang pag-ibig na, uri ng pag-ibig natin. And then of course, dahil literature, paggawa ng malikhain o creative o ng beauty. So yun. Sa pagmumula, tayo yun di ba? Kasi sa anumang revolution, nauuna yung concept. Yung sinasabi nga ni Neil na reality. Meron kang objective, merong avant-garde na gagawa nun. So, sa palagay ko, kayo yun, tayo yun. Kumbaga, meron tayong gustong baguhin, may binubuksan, nakalisipan. So, sa small group lang muna, hindi naman buong society kagad magbabago. So, yung small group na yun, tayo yun. At sa unting concept na nagagawa natin sa poetry, ay lalawak yun at mamumulat. Kasi ang gusto lang naman natin, maigalang din tayo ng kapwa. At ginagalang naman natin sila at mutual yun. Kung anumang kasariang mapili ay dapat igalang ng kapwa. At ngayon napakaraming concept ng sexual, ng gender, di ba? May cisgender, may transgender, na nakakalito. Pero sa dami niya, ang basic lang naman ay igalang. Kung ano yung decision ng individual, kung ano siya, ay dapat. Kasi ang gusto natin mangyari ay pagmamahal. Nais natin na kasabay ng pagmumulat ay magkalat tayo ng pag-ibig. At hindi lang ang lalaki o kapwa babae ang mamahalin, kundi lahat talaga. Kasi sa lipunan natin na napakalaki ng krisis. Huwag na nating dagdagan sa psychological na level. Kasi tayo yung mga revolutionary. Revolutionary tayo bilang mga individual na pag nagbago tayo ay doon nagsisimula yung revolusyon. At dyan din nagsisimula yung pagmamahal dahil may nasimula ang pagkaunawa o insight na sa poetry natin na matatagpuan. Sa literature, sa poetry at sa art, poetry ang ating sandata kasi tayong mga warriors of love tayo supposed to be. At sa paggawa nun, yung weapon natin ay magawa rin tayo ng kagandahan kasi poetry, basically beauty yan, beauty in language. At syempre, hindi natin kalilimutan ang sandata natin ay kagandahan. Hindi lang kagandahan pisikal, kundi yung nasa loob natin. Nasa loob natin na yung konsepto. Meron tayong objective na may insight tayong naisip na isinatula natin. At yung husay ng pagkakasulat na yun, yung kukumbinsi doon sa iba na para mamulat din. So, poetry talaga ang ating instrumento. Kaya sa 4 o 5 araw, ito pag-uusapan natin ang pagkamulat, ang ating insight, at ang ating pagmamahal sa sarili at sa kapwa. Kaya, welcome sa unang LGBTQ workshop, mga mga. tayo sa practical, may magsasabi ng house rule.
Bago yung on
Si,
house
bago
rules,
si
and
Francis.
bago yung house rules, I turn the floor over again to Professor Johnson, to Mark, because he will explain the forms that will be circulated now that you need to consider and signify your consent to. These are required by RCUK, right? Which is funding our project.
So,
This
this,
is the first one.
yeah, this is
Okay, got it.
So, thanks very much, Neil, and thank you it was so great to hear from you all. So as Neil said, because this is part of a bigger research project, we're required to follow the ethical guidelines set out by the Research Council. And a lot of what you've been describing already, and the experts as well, has been about ethical practice, right? And the kind of the ethics of writing and sharing and exchanging ideas with each other. This forum is really about our desire to document the workshop. You've seen photographers already at work, they're videoing this. Some of us will be taking notes and things like this. And the idea really is that hopefully, based on your experience of the workshop and what you bring to it and what you contribute as part of it, that it will be useful for other people as well, both here in the Philippines, but also more broadly. So this consent form is asking you if you are willing and agreeable to take part in this, but also it allows you to specify the kind of the remit or put your own delimitations on your participation. We heard from somebody this afternoon who has yet to disclose things to his parent, to his family. Now, you may choose, for example, though things are being recorded, it is completely and entirely legitimate for you to ask for your personal participation not to be put, say, on on Facebook or YouTube or things like that. That is entirely at your discretion. I mean, this is about, as Neil said, it's about creating a safe space. And we don't want what we do in documenting it already to violate that first principle. So please think carefully about what you are willing and prepared to share. If you don't want to be photographed, if you don't, I know that your photographs are already appearing on Facebook as fellows. If you want those to be withdrawn, we can do that so far as possible. So please let us know, and do have a look carefully through this. The other thing that this form is inviting you to give your consent to, I mentioned at the beginning that we're working on what we're calling a Museum of Equalities. We're also going to be developing a Global Grace online course. We're hoping that material that you produce and share here might become part of that course. And so part of this form is inviting you to indicate if you are willing to share your work, not just in the workshop, but more broadly, under this kind of Creative Commons license. That means you retain copyright, but you're enabling us to share, and you indicate the conditions under which you wish that to share, which again could be sharing under a pseudonym, right? And not having a pen name, rather than writing under your own name. This is really for you to decide. So do please have a read carefully from it. If you have any concerns or anxieties about it, do let us know, and we will...
to explain further.
Yes. Yeah.
You can approach any of us. This is all very professional. We actually don't do this. The creative writing, the UP-ICW has been documenting and just putting everything out there. Now we have to follow ethical protocols, which we should actually put in place in this university. And they will do so soon. I heard there is now an ethics board that's been organized. And they will do all of this very soon. So now we're ahead of the game, more or less. I've actually been asked by the Office of the Chancellor to give a sample of all these ethical forms, and they might copy them.
Sure.
It's the global standard. It should be done. You should actually consent to having anything of yours shared in media, right? Or stored in any kind of database The online course will be wonderful because of the creative communities that this project is nurturing and showcasing. All of their productions will end up being sort of part of that global museum, which is actually not a place but more or less an occasion or an event within which all the knowledges we generate can be shared. In our case, it's primarily your poems. Isn't that nice? Automatically, there's global distribution. So, okay, don't have to sign it. Can you just let them go? You don't have to do this now. You can take this with you to your rooms and, I don't know, mull things over. But so that we can go to the house rules, and then basically by tomorrow we'll collect them.
Yes.
Okay, sometime tomorrow we'll collect them. So Francis, tomorrow morning, yes. Francis now will remind us again of the house rules. Not very many.
So, good afternoon everyone. So this is part of the iteration of the house rules that I already sent to the fellows.
Not to us yet.
Not to us. Okay. So part of the fellowship is the commitment to attend and participate in all workshop sessions. So that means being on time for all workshop-related activities, and this is just the workshop. No? So as part of it, you're required to stay in the hotel. I mean, stay in the hotel means sleep in the hotel, so that early in the morning you're here and you're ready for the workshop. It doesn't mean you can't leave after the workshop. Yes, but you need to come back. So whatever time it is, just at 9 a.m. you're already here in the workshop, in the venue. And since you're already aware of your rooming situation, you're sharing a room with a co-fellow, so please observe common courtesy. The rooms are non-smoking. So if you're a smoker, if you need to
Are there any smokers among you? Okay, so where do they smoke?
Dito sa patio behind, there's a section they have named aptly as the lung center. That's the smoking area. They found it.
Mark will join you there.
Yeah. And then all meals starting tonight and then up to the morning of the 27th will be handled by us. No? So after this, I think we can go and have dinner. Double check, no? If dinner is ready. And then
we'll try to process their stipend and the reimbursement
Yeah.
for it. Who are the ones who took planes? 1, 2, just 2. The others who took buses? 1. Okay, you will be reimbursed for transport.
Tomorrow, hopefully, the OBCE RD staff will come here and have forms for you to fill out.
Yeah, you have to sign, and
You have
then
to
we'll
sign.
process them while the workshop is going on. Hopefully the money can be released.
Hopefully-
So long as there are no more work suspensions because of the weather.
Yes. And then, lastly, I just want to remind everyone about tomorrow's sessions. So you can read na. So first off, we'll have Mariel's suite, and then King's, and then finally Alfonso's. In the kit,
Yeah, it's fine.
Alfredo. So
Alfie's.
Alfie's story. By the way, I also sent an email to everyone asking if you wanted a print copy of the kit. Some of you signified you didn't. Those who wanted a copy, they're at the back, so you can just get them there. And then that's it.
That's it. Okay, so we wait for dinner, or
Ronald will probably
find out.
But otherwise,
Those who are done filling up the forms and can submit them now, so you don't have to worry about them.
oh, by the way, we also, if you don't feel well, please tell me or Benji here or Rona, who just went out. No? We have first aid.
And the infirmary is very near.
Yeah, we can just walk. We can just wheel you down to the infirmary.
Nothing too serious. They can handle minor cases.
Kaya na po.
So, kaya. Wala pa.
Ready na ba?
Meron na.
Dinner served.
Okay, thank you.